is we're asking you to do.
Yeah, but I still don't understand how any of this is my fault.
We've already explained it. Now all you need to do is fix it.
But where the hell do I start?
I think you know exactly where.
Oh man, he was right. This came out really well. Ranger! Don't make a time travel intro for the Terminator video. It's cliche and a hack move, and everyone has done one of those. The future is literally hanging in the balance. You hit render already, didn't you? Well, yeah, you told me to. What? Yeah, you were literally just here, and you said the intro came out really good, and that you would show up in a few minutes and tell me not to do it, but it was actually just fine, and that I should hit render before you could pop in. What the fuck? Well, kids, it's really hard to make a history video on a game that apparently doesn't have any history to talk about. No lie, kids, one of the reasons this video has taken so long is because I have been confounded at every twist and turn trying to find any and all detailed information on the development of this game. I've done videos in the past where there was relatively little information to research and work with when it came to the game I was covering, but Terminator Future Shock, a game developed and published by Bethesda, the second game that Todd freaking Howard worked on after joining Bethesda, a game that pioneered huge, open, fully 3D environments that would become a staple of Bethesda's design philosophy. A first-person shooter that not only featured these big open maps to explore, but also featured 2 different types of vehicular gameplay, as well as full mouse look, not just kind of looking up and down, but actual full mouse look. A game that has all of these design credits while doing it all nearly a full year before Quake would release, and there's like no history on the development of it anywhere. The Wikipedia page is drier than the nuclear wasteland. The fan wiki is nearly as sparse on information, and the closest thing I came to getting any insight into development of the game was a 2015 interview with Todd Howard in Wired magazine shortly after the release of Fallout 4. In the interview, Howard states that he had great memories of working on the game, lamenting that after the release of Quake, it seemed like gamers sort of forgot about Future Shock. He also spoke on how Future Shock was where Bethesda built their design philosophy for future open-world games.
We wanted these big, even in those days, expansive levels that you could explore. The way we built Future Shock, you have a height map and instanced 3D objects rendering on top. That, believe it or not, is still how we build today. It's our basic paradigm for how to build a space.
Now, look, I know Todd Howard is a somehow divisive character. I don't get why. He's not greasy like Randy, and he's not skeevy like Tim. He just kind of comes across to me as a really big nerd who's maybe a little too earnest, but he's got his heart in the right place.
That glows in the fucking dark.
Running everything under the hood here is Bethesda's versatile X engine, a 3D game engine that, according to Todd, was specifically built for 1996's Elder Scrolls II Daggerfall to replace the previous 2.5D raycasting engine that the first Elder Scrolls game had utilized. X engine allowed Terminator Future Shock to have such forward-thinking features as rotating camera movement, fully 3D modeled enemies and environments, dynamic lighting, and as mentioned previously, full fucking mouse look in set environments. One fantastic innovation here is the map, which can be confusing to navigate sometimes due to the game's low draw distance, but it provides a 3D perspective of the immediate surroundings to help give landmarks for the player to work with. Bethesda would go on to craft multiple games using the X engine, including Elder Scrolls spin-offs Redguard and Battlespire, but Terminator Future Shock would be the first game they released that was built using it. Now, Future Shock wasn't the first Terminator game that Bethesda developed and published. Back in 1990, Bethesda secured a deal with Hemdale Film Corporation to develop games based on the Terminator license. The first would be titled simply The Terminator, released in 1991. It was a rudimentary first-person action title that featured a massive 3D rendered map of central Los Angeles, 10 by 6 miles, with a detailed foldable map included in the box for referencing. Bethesda released their second Terminator game in 1992, a first-person shooter using the kind of mouse aim that will become popular in many arcade-style shooters down the line. According to Christopher Weaver, founder of Bethesda, members of id Software came down to Bethesda Studios to see the footage of Terminator 2029 during development, and stated that it was one of the inspirations for their future work, which Weaver reportedly admitted to John Carmack some years later that it had done it even better than Bethesda had. Speaking of inspirations, Bethesda's third Terminator game, Terminator Rampage, was a more traditional first-person shooter released in December of 1993, which clearly took notes from Wolfenstein 3D during its development. It ran on the same engine as the first Elder Scrolls game, Arena, but this entry in Bethesda's Terminator series wasn't well received. So here we now have Terminator Future Shock, a game released in August of 1995. There's so little information about this game online that I can't even find a specific release date for it. Just fucking sometime in August of 95. The Wired interview with Todd Howard refers to Terminator Future Shock as a forgotten title, and to be honest, really fucking is. This is one of the times that I fully and truly lament that PC game history and preservation is woefully lacking in certain corners. Terminator Future Shock is a game that actually honestly did certain aspects of what would become staples in modern open world titles at such an early point in 3D gaming that it is practically criminal that this game is so viciously forgotten. The game isn't even available in any digital distribution markets either. Much like Tech War, which I covered recently, this is pure abandonware. I downloaded my copy from myabandonware.com and I played it through vanilla DOSBox. There are no source ports for playing this game, although an indie developer was working on a Unity wrapper to play Future Shock through, similar to the Daggerfall Unity project a couple of years ago. But his Twitter seems to have devolved into AI art, so that's neat. If you want to play Terminator Future Shock, you have one of two options: playing the original through DOSBox, or playing the sequel, Skynet, also through DOSBox. Now, Skynet also runs on the X engine, and it was originally designed to be an expansion for Future Shock until Bethesda decided to change it into a full-blown sequel. Now, one of Future Shock's biggest criticisms on release was the lack of multiplayer, something that was slowly coming to be an expectation for the new first-person shooters after the successes of Doom and Doom 2. So Skynet was designed to feature deathmatch to make it up to fans of the first game, but it also brought such upgrades as FMV cutscenes between missions and higher resolution graphics at 640 by 480. Once the decision was made to transform Skynet into a sequel versus an expansion, a whole new plot was written for the player to experience in the single-player campaign. Now, this connection, however, made it so that when Skynet was released, there was the option to play Future Shock in Skynet's higher resolution, which is admittedly pretty fucking sweet, but truth be told, if you want to do that these days, you have to jump through some digital hoops and exe files through DOSBox, and frankly, I didn't feel up to that task. Which does mean that instead of the gorgeous 640 by 480 resolution that Skynet allows for, I played Future Shock in masterful, wonderful 320 by 240 pixelated goodness. Now, that made some of the visuals in this experience about as clear as a dirty windshield at times, but I gotta say, with the low poly count, the janky apocalyptic atmosphere, and the MIDI soundtrack in the background, playing Future Shock in this low resolution made it feel like I was experiencing a puppet combo horror game at times. And that's a good thing. Well, kids, since there isn't much to muse on here from a historical perspective, it's time for us to crack our knuckles, prepare for time travel, and dive deep into the fascinating adventure that is Terminator Future Shock. Because despite low poly appearances, there is actually a hell of a lot going on here. First thing I have to note is the game's fantastic menu. I love it when a game establishes the tone of what's to come right in the main menu itself. Simple, easy, ominous. The T-800 turns to look at you, the logo comes down, we're definitely in a Terminator game. And it's not going to go easy on us. Starting a new game, we're treated to a brief, mid-90s CGI cutscene where Los Angeles is destroyed by nuclear fire in 1995. Not 1997 like the film lore dictates, but this is a gentle and clever deviation that I believe will be explained later. And then our player character is shown escaping one of the Terminator... Am I allowed to say that out loud? Is that a YouTube violation? Fuck it! Our player character is shown escaping one of the Terminator death camps, something that is not simply set up for shock and awe, but a plot detail that will come back around in the most haunting of manners. Well, at first, things look grim for us. A resistance fighter steps out of the shadows to save our ass at the cost of his own life. Alright, so what the hell should we expect while playing this game? First off, the game is divided into 17 missions, and at the beginning of each mission, we'll experience one of these. Our options are simple. Begin the mission, get the actual detailed mission briefing, explore the list of potential threats we could meet and how they could affect us in the tactical section, and view the statistics of our playthrough up till this point. You'll notice down here in the message box that we will receive the basic mission objectives up front, so that if we've already played through the game once before, for example, we don't need to sit through each lengthy briefing every single time. But clicking on the briefing tab takes us into a surprisingly well-written and oftentimes dramatic dialogue with whoever we're speaking to in the moment, highlighted by gorgeous early DOS animations. Here, for example, Sergeant Roberts delivers his last gasp with more detailed information on where we need to go, giving specific directions on which way to travel and what to look for in the surrounding area. As we move forward in the game and connect with the human resistance, meeting such iconic characters as John Connor and Kyle Reese, don't think I didn't notice that Daggerfall t-shirt, Bethesda, we'll be treated to, at worst, competently written dialogue, and at best, genuinely gripping conversations throughout the briefings. Characters will be introduced across the length of the campaign, some of whom will survive to the end of the game, some of whom will not. Some of these deaths are telegraphed ahead of time, and others will hit you over the head with a casual report that someone died while you were out running your latest mission. There is a constant and honestly gripping atmosphere of dread with each mission, something which we experience not only in the mission briefings, but through sparse dialogue as we travel across the map as well. Gameplay during missions is simultaneously pretty straightforward, as well as deceptively complex. Basic boomer shooter gameplay of running and gunning various Terminator models is interspersed with environmental exploration, and, at times, some switch hunting puzzles. Although I definitely wouldn't call Future Shock a straight-up boomer shooter, because if you play this like a traditional FPS, you're gonna get your shit pushed in pretty fucking often. Todd Howard's statement about how Future Shock is the origin for Bethesda's open-world building blocks really hits home once you start meandering about the open maps. Each map of each mission here acts as a kind of miniature version of, say, Skyrim or Fallout's larger worlds. You'll travel from one corner to another, free to roam or explore in any direction you choose, with an ultimate series of objectives towards a singular goal in order to move on. And when I say any direction, I do mean any. Down here in your HUD, you'll notice that you have an actual compass to help guide you from point to point. If you get lost, this is what's going to keep you on track. Mission objectives will give such specific directions as to even tell you to head north or northwest, and then turn east or head south. This little compass even foreshadows that fucking navigation bar at the top of the screen of like every open world game that's ever come out ever. So there's another notch on Bethesda's belt there. As you travel the maps on foot, you'll come across buildings that can be explored. You're not required to enter most of them, but searching through the broken down structures could yield armor, health, or ammo that you might desperately need. Quite a few missions have you traveling from one spot to another in what I'm going to refer to as the general overworld. There's going to be missions which require you to locate a specific building, or even a series of buildings in the overworld, and then enter said structures in order to make your way through to the objective at the heart of it. One of the most memorable missions involved making my way across the overworld, investigating a series of barracks and a death camp, entering each one at a time before discovering and then utilizing a sewer system in order to cut across to a pickup site somewhere else on the overworld. It's this mission here where the horror that the game is reaching for really hits the hardest, as your character attempts to break in and rescue some of the prisoners in the camp, only to discover that the Terminators have already executed everyone. It's grim, bleak, and a healthy reminder that this is an action game set in a world that holds no mercy for anyone, especially you. This sequence all flows so seamlessly from one environment to the next that it feels really hard to believe that this is a game from 1995 and not one of Bethesda's latter-day releases. In fact, with a little retooling and reworking, this game could easily be reconfigured to exist in the same kind of supermassive map as Skyrim or Fallout 4, where you could drive across the wasteland, helping survivors in need while traveling from one campaign mission to the next. Speaking of driving, Future Shock doesn't just feature on-foot combat in the overworld. Nope, somehow Bethesda was able to program in not one, but two different types of vehicular missions in the game. The first type is driving in one of those sweet resistance jeeps that gets exploded in the movies, complete with a laser gun turret and a rocket launcher for a secondary fire. The second type is piloting a hijacked hunter-killer drone. You know, those sweet flying Terminator ships that get exploded in the movies. And the hunter-killer, or HK as it's simply referred to, also has laser cannons and a rocket launcher. So on a gameplay/combat level, the two vehicle mission types are essentially the same, except in one you're driving on the ground, and in the other you're flying through the sky. It's a pretty neat idea and concept to go Mad Maxing it around in a weaponized Jeep or an HK, blasting the shit out of Terminators and turrets across a vicious wasteland. in concept. We'll get back to it. Going back to the HUD for a second, we have an interesting take on the staples of the genre. Armor and health meters are measured as bars instead of numerically. There's a radiation indicator that generally stays green for safe levels, but turns red for unsafe levels. Although the chittering Geiger counter sound and the rapidly flashing red screen are going to be better indicators that you're taking radiation damage. And you can see the ammo counter for both your current selected primary and secondary weapons. Most of the secondary weapons are throwable explosives like grenades, pipe bombs, and Molotovs, although sometimes there are more stationary explosives like satchel charges meant for destroying larger structures as part of mission objectives. Primary weapons break down into basic categories: hit scan bullet guns, projectile-based laser weaponry, projectile-based phased cannon weaponry, which are somehow different from the lasers and somehow slightly more powerful than the lasers, maybe because the laser weapons were built by humans and the phased cannons are Terminator weapons. Probably, I don't fucking know. And then we also have explosive launchers. Each of these categories have different weapons in tiers, from weakest to strongest, with the strongest usually consuming much more ammo than the lower tiered weapons. So you kind of have to choose a trade-off of utilizing more damage output to destroy hefty targets faster, or conserving ammo ever so slightly by chipping away at their health with less powerful guns. So for example, the hit scan bullet weapons range from the basic Uzi to the mid-tier assault rifle, and then finally the uber powerful heavy machine gun. Now, while both the assault rifle and the machine gun are going to crack open Terminators a hell of a lot quicker than the Uzi, you have to take into consideration just how quickly the heavy machine gun will rip through your ammo supplies, making it so that maybe you shouldn't be using it on anything lower than mid-tier enemies. Amongst the arsenal are two outliers: the lead pipe that you start off with and is your only melee weapon and is basically useless and shouldn't be used in any circumstances ever unless absolute desperation is at hand, and the shotgun, which is the single most powerful and also the weakest weapon in the whole of the game. I am not joking. The shotgun is somehow god tier damage combined with busted ass accuracy. I love the shotgun in this game. In fact, I actually generally appreciate the arsenal as a whole. The automatic weapons are decent. The laser weapons are also pretty neat, although my favorite is the laser rifle that has the night vision scope on it. It's a fairly useless scope compared to modern counterparts, as you can't actually zoom in with a button press, but if you pay attention to the little screen on the scope, you'll be able to pick up on shapes that are further away than the draw distance allows. The phase cannons are fine for the most part. They felt like barely noticeable upgrades from the laser guns that consumed even more battery power, which is something you're gonna want to keep an eye on because both the laser and phase cannons draw from the same ammo pool. And the explosive weapons are exceptionally effective. The rocket launcher does a hell of a job. And yes, the grenade launcher is very clearly modeled on the pulse rifle design from Aliens. Nice touch there, Bethesda. But for my money, and I didn't pay any money for this because it's abandonware, the shotgun is 100% where it's at. If it wasn't for the inconsistent accuracy, this thing would be even better than Doom's shotgun. First off, look at this animation. The pump action is fierce, the little smoke trail from the barrel as you lift it is a delightful touch, and the sound effect is appropriately meaty. Depending on the roll of the dice, you could be absolutely wrecking shit as you stride across the maps. I was blowing arms off of turrets at 100 paces. I had a couple of times where I turned and downed an HK in one fucking shotgun blast. Just one! The shotgun's damage is severely overpowered, and yet the accuracy is brutally all over the place. Accuracy is probably the biggest problem with the combat in this game as a whole, but with the shotgun, it's at its most noticeable. Taking out HKs and turrets from a distance is all well and good, but this is most likely because they are such big targets that missing them is kind of a rare thing. Smaller targets like the little walkers that inhabit both the overworld and the various buildings you explore, somehow due to their polygon counts, they can be much more difficult to get a beat on. Anything that has multiple limbs seems the most prone to successful dodge rolls, if nothing more than the fact that they happen to have a lot of space between portions of their bodies. Enemies like these will literally walk towards you as you empty round after round from your shotgun as though you're just tossing off blanks. But then again, sometimes they'll explode within a hit or two. The hit scan weapons suffer at times from terrible hit detection, particularly against smaller floating enemies, and the projectile laser phaser guns suffer from terrible velocity. You could be circle strafing and your aim could be impeccable, but if you're not 100% correcting for movement of both your weapon blasts and the movement of the enemy, it is all too easy to miss, especially if you're also moving to get out of the way of incoming fire. See, incoming fire is a big problem. Most enemies in the game fire laser phasers at you, so there's projectiles that you can easily track and attempt to move out of the way of. Problem is, if you're moving to avoid incoming fire, you're also moving while firing, which decreases your accuracy even more. Even moving backwards in a straight line affects the accuracy of the projectiles. In one hallway, I had a Terminator dead to rights and should have been able to hit it with ease, and yet, as you can see here, my projectiles are somehow slipping past him as though I was pouring water through a colander. In those situations, laser phasers are not your friends. The hit scan weapons are, which, depending on the dice roll and the resilience of the enemy, may or may not actually be your friend. Of course, there's always your secondary weapons and the all-powerful help of explosions and their area of effect. Splash damage is a crucial aid in this game. Fucking crucial. Molotovs, pipe bombs, grenades, they all work real well no matter which one you choose. I'm sure that grenades are more powerful than Molotovs, but explosions in Future Shock all seem to have the same base damage. And when you're out here, trying not to die and running low on bullets, bombs can and will save your fucking life. The grenade launcher and the rocket launcher too are gonna keep your scrawny ass alive when you walk into a room full of Terminators. And let me tell you, buddy, Terminators in this game are just as scary as they're supposed to be. Actually, pretty much every single enemy in this game is just as scary as it's supposed to be. You're gonna die a lot in Future Shock. A lot. Whether Bethesda meant for the game to be this way or not, and I'm guessing this is intentional considering there is no difficulty selection for the game, Terminator Future Shock is a gripping, sweaty experience in which you will be checking every single corner you can whenever you're inside of a structure, hoping and praying that you can get the drop of whatever may or may not be waiting for you on the other side. And in the overworld, you'll be looking back and forth constantly, scanning the terrible draw distance for any pixels that might be moving or could possibly be a collection of polygons that make up an enemy unit, hoping and praying that there isn't an HK hovering overhead taking advantage of said terrible draw distance to do a flyby and drop a series of bombs on you, ending your life once again. Now, real quick, I do want to comment that the graphics in this game are, for the time and what they are, excellent. I compared the aesthetics and the low resolution to a modern Puppet Combo game, and I stand by that. I would actually love to see Puppet Combo make a Terminator game now that I think about it, you know? Maybe something sort of like in the first Terminator flick, where Linda Hamilton is running for her life from Arnold Schwarzenegger, hiding in the police station or the factory at the end. That would be a great horror game, honestly. I'm getting off track. Where was I? Oh, right. The graphics here are outstanding for both the time and the feel of the game. You can see and feel the handcrafted textures and placement of the buildings. This is all mood, all in service of giving the player an experience like what they saw in the flashbacks of the first Terminator flick. Weapon sprites are great, animations are great. This is a great looking game. Were it on a higher resolution, had I taken the time to figure out how to get it to run through Skynet instead of vanilla Future Shock, it would look even better here on your screens. That being said, the draw distance in the overworld is horrendous. You'll be constantly doing your damnedest to make out HKs or large turrets or Terminator tanks that will suddenly appear out of the black fog, huge and looming and deadly and already firing on your position before you even have a chance to track them. The map is no better. Pressing tab to check the map will certainly help you establish your bearings for the surrounding area, but the draw distance in the map is about the same as what you can see in the game, just from a slightly overhead view. All of this can and will make those vehicular segments a pain in the fucking ass to complete. You see, you take a lot of damage in this game. A lot. Like, way too much, in my humble fucking opinion. In a lot of ways, Future Shock predates the way survival crafting games exist nowadays, where you can't simply stride boldly into combat and expect to make it out the other side unscathed simply because you've got a big rapid-fire gun in your hands. No, if you stand still at all, if you stand within range of enemy fire at all, and if you so much as blink when you ought to be moving and dodging, you're gonna get perforated, and you're gonna see this screen a lot. And to make things slightly frustrating about it, if and when you die, you are taken to a restart mission screen, and you get to choose yes or no. Now, of course, you probably have a save file mid-mission that you want to load, but you can't load it from here. Instead, you have to click no, boot back to the main menu, then select load from there. Of course, you could always click yes, go back to the mission briefing, enter the mission, then hit escape, and then click load to your save, which is fine. But either way you go, when you die, you can't just reload a save file with any sense of speed. You have to take some roundabout method to finally being able to load a save file and get back to the action from which you were just dispatched. When it comes to staying alive, when you're on foot, you at least have the ability to pick up health and armor replenishments, of which there are surprisingly copious amounts of pickups littered about. Dedicated explorers searching every nook and cranny of the overworld can and will find enough supplies to keep them topped up on health and ammo, enough to last well into the next mission and beyond. That being said, if you're not actively working to stay out of harm's way, your hunt for said supplies will feel less like a jaunty foray and more like frantic searching. It is far too easy to lose half of your health bar in seconds if you're not paying attention, especially if you're facing off against the T-800 Terminators. They have the same hit scan heavy machine gun that you can find, and if you're in range of it at all, you're losing health. Dueling against Terminators is a frantic series of circle strafing bunny hops combined with backing up out of their range so that you can unload on them, because otherwise, if you're in their line of sight and you're not trying to move, then God help you. Later missions will see enemies with rocket launchers, and I had more than one occasion where I entered a room with my health bar 3/4 full, only to eat a rocket to the face and die instantly. Remember how I was talking about explosive weapons being your best friend in this game? Well, the downside to explosive weapons is that they cause enemies to explode. And when enemies explode, they shatter into debris, every piece of which has its own explosive properties. Depending on the size of the Terminator that you're exploding, there will be larger or smaller pieces of debris, which will cause larger or smaller individual explosions as each one lands on the ground, creating larger or smaller areas of explosive damage that you could potentially walk through if you're rushing forward too fast. Hell, shit explodes even if you're not using explosive weapons. One of the coolest goddamn things about this game is a destructible environment. Wrecked cars, boxes, planks of wood, computer terminals, so much of the world can and should be destroyed in order to make your progress easier. In fact, if you want to use said environment to your own advantage, blowing up a wrecked vehicle in the overworld after kiting a couple of Terminators next to it can properly do enough damage to them and give you an edge in combat. But if you're too close to a Terminator, or if you try to rush by as one explodes, or you're standing underneath an HK as it blows up and every huge piece of its hull comes screaming down to earth around you, there's a strong chance you're going to get swallowed up in the resulting carpet bombing that is simply a result of successfully destroying an enemy fighter, which only adds to the sense of sweatiness when one appears directly in front of you and you open fire without considering proximity. Damage is rough. Fall damage is even rougher. I swear to God, if you fall more than like 3 inches, you're taking fall damage. You gotta wonder what this guy's knees look like if he's losing a 1/4 inch of health with every fall. There's one section of the game where you have to drop down into a room from the ceiling to find your objective, but I had taken so much damage during the course of the mission that I literally did not have enough health to make the drop. I shit you not, kids. The developers intentionally made this drop so that you would take damage falling down, and I did not have enough health to make this drop. The devs did place a couple of health and armor packs at the bottom of the drop, knowing that you would be taking this damage, but it was just out of reach of my ability to fall towards it, and despite multiple attempts, I just couldn't awkwardly angle my tumble down in order to land on the health pack so that my fall damage would be negated. I ended up using a cheat code to refill my health bar so I could just finish the mission, but like, how fucking cruel a joke is that? If you're gonna make me drop down into a room that I have to drop into in order to fulfill an objective, don't make me take fall damage from that. That's just not fucking fair. So you'd think that with all the ways to take damage, the ease of which your health bar goes from full to nil, this would be a mighty frustrating game, right? Nope. Oh man, once you start experimenting with the movement controls on foot, this game turns into something else. A second ago, I was talking about how Future Shock predates survival crafting games in a way, but the truth is, this is more of a movement shooter like Doom Eternal or Viscera Fest. I am dead fucking serious. Terminator Future Shock is, at essence, a movement shooter. You've got the basic groundwork for it, the way you quickly take damage and will die swiftly if you stand still, the copious amounts of health and ammo pickups, the sheer volume of enemies who will zero in on you and go for the jugular, but the biggest component is the movement scheme here in Future Shock, and oh baby does it deliver. Firstly, this being one of the first, if not the first, FPS titles to have full mouse look in a 3D engine, I have to stress just how smooth and fluid the mouse control is. No joke, I made 0 adjustments to sensitivity, and again, I'm playing this in vanilla DOSBox. I was fully expecting to have a hard time with aiming and just looking around in general, but holy shit, Bethesda's biggest miracle here is the mouse look. Simple, smooth, precise. I never had an issue with the mouse, and that focus made combat all the better. Secondly, the movement is ridiculously tight. WASD controls are standard, programmed excellently, but it's the running and jumping that actually make the experience what it is. Your character's sprint has quite a bit of speed to it, which is nothing new to this area of FPS titles. In fact, the run speed back during this day of OG shooters was a little too fast at times, but the run speed here feels a little bit more akin to hovering quickly across the ground. Then, when you combine it with the game's floaty jump and excellent air controls, you can and will hop across much bigger gaps than you would think is actually possible. I love the jump in Future Shock. It's so big and it's so floaty, but not quite as high as you think it should be, which can lead to a couple awkward jumps where you think you should be able to cross over an obstacle, but you can't. But holy fuck, the bunny hopping you can get away with in this game is fucking stupid. Strafe hopping is even faster than hopping forward, so you can hop across the overworld at a ridiculous rate. But when you have large enough arenas where you're surrounded by enemies in what would otherwise be an impossible situation, you can hop and turn on a dime with surgical air control and pull off demonic movement like this. Of course, you can still get too cocky and land yourself in just the wrong spot and suddenly eat all of the damage flying your way at any given second, but the air control, the mouse look, the strafe hopping, it can all combine into gloriously buttery smooth gameplay, and it is so fucking satisfying. But the thing of it is, again, if you're on foot, you have a lot of pickups you can find in order to keep yourself topped up on health and armor. The vehicular sections?
Absolutely fucking not.
The vehicular sections, revolutionary though they may be for the time, are a fucking travesty to navigate. You know how a minute ago I detailed how vicious the damage is to you when you're walking around? Well, imagine that, but with less fluid controls and no way to regain health or armor. Much as I want to praise the vehicle missions for being a little ahead of their time, boy, oh God, are they rough to actually play through. Our first introduction to this is driving the Jeep in Mission 2. Immediately, the controls make their painful presence known. Like other driving segments of other games, the Jeep is controlled with WASD, W and D for forward and reverse, S and D for turning left and right. This leaves the mouse control free to look in a limited number of angles. We're in a car, so naturally we don't have the same freedom as we do on foot. But driving in first person with the keyboard while aiming with the mouse is awkward at best, frantically frustrating at worst. Since we have manual control of the camera at all times, there's never a point where the camera will reset itself to a forward-facing angle. So you'll be constantly fighting to figure out where center is if you turn the aiming reticle anywhere away from the front of the Jeep. I swear to God, kids, I had too many times where I would swing the camera back and forth to shoot things around me, and then swing the camera back to front in order to check on which direction I was headed, only to discover that I was angling wildly in the wrong direction and would end up careening into the environment. Aiming while driving forward can and will result in you simply crashing headlong into everything around you, which then makes stopping your car to fire at enemies the most accurate and easiest way to handle these missions. But as we've discussed, standing still for too long is the quickest way to get that mission failed screen. Driving sequences are high-key the most frustrating and sweaty bits of the game. I respect what Bethesda was going for here, and no doubt future games of this type certainly owe to the groundbreaking work done in Future Shock, but boy oh boy does it feel rough sometimes. Only slightly easier to deal with are the flying missions where you pilot a recovered hunter-killer. Flying at least has the advantage of being slightly more mobile than the Jeep, able to strafe left and right while looking around with the mouse, but the biggest downside to flying is that there really isn't a good sense of how high or low you can safely fly. I tried to fly over objects that felt like I ought to be able to fly over, but yet I hit the height ceiling while other enemy HKs would still hover over and above me. And if you want to successfully shoot any enemies at all while piloting this goddamn thing, you're gonna have to hover in place. And here we go again with standing still in a game where standing still will kill you quickly. Ultimately, these missions don't break the game, nor are they so frustrating as to completely bounce the player out of enjoying them. But the biggest drawback to these missions is that there's no way to recover health or armor while you're playing them. You're subjected to the same amount of punishment and consequences for standing still and not paying attention to the enemies around you, so Holy shit, kids. I got a little frantic during the vehicle missions. I felt like I couldn't react quick enough or pay enough attention. Oftentimes, coming under fire from Terminators in the environment that would pop out of the draw distance already firing at me because I was moving forward too quickly, so they saw me long before I saw them. Inching forward slowly but surely in a vehicle in a video game really isn't all that fun. Still, the overall vibe of Future Shock, the idea of trying to survive in a hostile and oppressive environment, lends well to these missions. So rather than the sensation of having our power fantasy stripped away simply because we can't stay topped up on health and armor, it feels like an extra layer of vulnerability being in a vehicle that is both protecting you and subjecting you to harsher punishment. It really doesn't help that the weapons for both the Jeep and the HK are projectile lasers, meaning, just like with the handheld laser phasers, you're gonna have a hard time gauging distance and velocity if you're trying to move while firing. Still, out of the 17 missions total in Future Shock, only 7 of them involve driving or flying, and the other 10 are all about running and gunning. Rarely are we asked to do multiple vehicle missions back to back, and even when we are, it's no more than 2. So the vehicle missions, in their own way, really do add extra tension and terror to an action game that is designed to make you feel vulnerable, and that death could come for you literally at any moment out of the darkness. Now, if it was just the janky vehicle missions and the rough difficulty and the fact that your character is a damage sponge, I might be looking at this game a little bit differently and adding an extra point or 2 to my final score. But something else we have to take into consideration, something that really truly makes me lament that there hasn't been some kind of remaster or at least a reworking of the game's mechanics, is something else that has become a staple of Bethesda's open world games: the bugs. Boy, oh fucking boy, kids, would this game benefit from a fan patch. I had enemies get stuck in the floor multiple times and were still able to shoot at me. I had enemies fly through solid objects and were still able to shoot at me. Getting your character stuck in the environment is a constant fear, particularly considering that there are a lot of obstacles that you find yourself attempting to jump over in order to progress, only to get caught in some kind of weird, nebulous glue point, and then you have to reload a save file that is something like 20 minutes old. But the 2 most egregious bugs that I ran into involved mission completion. Now, I'm sure there's more sticking points that'll get you all kinds of fucked up progression-wise, but these 2 were so jarring that I can actually remember off the top of my head where they are in my footage. One mission involves an underground bunker that you're investigating, and there's a platform you need to lower in order to hop over to the other side of an otherwise unreachable access point. It's this floating cube thing here. I don't know why it's a fucking cube specifically. Maybe it's supposed to represent the geometric design that the Terminators utilize, but for some reason, no matter what I did, if I reloaded an older save or restarted the entire fucking level, the switch to lower this thing is completely bugged. Now, as you go through the various missions of the game, there are Hexen-style switch puzzles that you'll be required to pull or activate or turn off in order to activate or deactivate something somewhere within the mission. And it isn't exactly always obvious what sort of effect you've just had on the environment. So here, in this mission, I did, in fact, flip the correct switch to lower the cube platform. It just absolutely refused to operate. I had to go and verify this by looking at both a text walkthrough as well as a long play on YouTube in order to make sure that I wasn't being an idiot dad and had just bypassed the switch that I needed altogether. So when I had double checked everything and realized that the level was somehow too bugged for me to actually progress any further, I turned to the only option that I had: cheat codes. I am not ashamed to admit that Terminator Future Shock was so broken that I had to use the skip level cheat in order to maintain progress. But what made it extra frustrating, and you can see here, you can see me typing in the code. Once I activated it, somehow the invisible gears turned at last and the cube dropped into place like it was supposed to, and I got the mission complete text. Oh, kids. Oh shit, that one wrung me the wrong way. I nearly resorted to the level skip cheat again in one of the Jeep missions. See, the objective here is to drive to a specific location on the overworld, clear out any danger surrounding the stopping point, and then the mission should end. Well, I found myself driving in circles around the pickup location after having cleared out every single visible Terminator that I could find. I thought that maybe there was some enemy of some kind, maybe just stuck in the environment somewhere that maybe I couldn't see them, so I was hunting aggressively. And after another walkthrough confirmation stating that I was not only in the right place, but that I should have cleared out all the Terminators by this point, I nearly hit that cheat code just to save myself time and effort. But I thought, you know what? No. So, I'm gonna reload my save and see if I can manually clear out all the Terminators again. I'll get the gears to tick over by themselves. When I reloaded my save, which was right next to the mission objective, mind you, the game immediately granted me a mission complete and I was able to move on. I had already done all of the things that I needed to. The game just wouldn't click over into completed objective status for some reason. After these instances, I started maintaining 2 save files just to be cautious. I didn't want my gameplay going straight to pot just because some bug refused to activate a hidden switch and derail mission progress. And I'll tell you what, kids, from that moment on, every single mission was a sweaty experience of wondering if or when the next bug was going to stop me in my tracks and prevent me from reaching the final destination. In a way, it's almost fitting, considering that you're playing a game about a technological revolution gone sour, and that the technology of the game itself is fighting against your progression. That would actually make for an interesting idea, you know? An intentionally buggy game where you have to avoid tripping said numerous bugs in order to get to the end. Anyways, fueling this anxiety is the fact that some of the missions are really not easy to navigate. One thing that didn't bother me, but might bother some, is the fact that the overworld basically just kind of looks the same. I didn't find this to be a bad thing. After all, we are dealing with the aftermath of the nuclear wasteland and the Terminators ravaging humanity. It felt exactly like an overworld in a game of this type should, so the landscape being basically the same, just with varied buildings all around, never felt boring in the slightest. The underground bunkers, however, those can get a little samey. They all have a similar vibe and feel throughout the course of their interiors, so while they are intriguing and interesting to explore, particularly exiting the open overworld into a series of narrow corridors that restrict your bunny hopping prowess, some of them are deep, labyrinthine explorations with similar looking hallways and computer consoles and platforms that, combined with the Hexen-style switch hunting puzzles, will have you turned around and lost and wondering if you missed a switch, missed a turn, or missed the point of the mission entirely. The final mission of the game is the most egregious example of this. It took me 2.5 fucking hours to complete the final mission. The whole map is a massive, sprawling complex with multiple branches and arms and corridors you need to explore in order to access 5 separate computer nodes for story purposes. Certain branches of the map lead to 1 or more nodes, while other branches are dead ends. At one point, you'll need to destroy an entire computer terminal to reveal a hidden door, which is the only way to access an out-of-reach platform. Some paths loop back and around onto themselves and onto other paths, so you'll find yourself crisscrossing the same areas over and over, searching and hoping to find some kind of door that you overlooked, or hidden entryway, or access point, or switch to turn, and it took everything. All the resources at my disposal. The compass, the map, taking notes. Like, God, I wish the final mission was less dense and intimidating because I genuinely want to turn around and replay this game, but the idea of having to sludge through that experience just one more time is fucking... And yet, if anything, Terminator Future Shock is definitely a game that I do want to replay, despite the bugs, despite the sometimes poor pathfinding, despite the frustrating amount of damage you can and will take during the course of the experience. Because at the end of the day, the ominous and oppressive atmosphere combined with the good to great gameplay was more than enough to keep me hooked. It was the story that elevated everything into a truly excellent Terminator experience. I'm not a big Terminator nerd. I haven't watched all of the movies or seen the show or played all of the games. I did see the first flick once. I've seen T2 more times than I could ever hope to count. I saw the third flick once. And after watching the noisy, overproduced Terminator Salvation, I figured that was enough of the franchise for me. I mean, if Christian Bale can't save a film, nothing can.
I'm gonna fucking kick your fucking ass. You don't shut up for a second, all right?
But I can confidently say that if any of you Terminator fans out there are looking for a good fix from your favorite franchise, I would earnestly offer this up and scream, play this! The story is great. It is really so fucking good. Once your character escapes the death camp and meets up with the Resistance, we're introduced to a number of characters, including the iconic John Connor, and we even get to see little baby Kyle Reese join up with the Resistance as a survivor from a completely separate attack. John Connor's been looking for a few good men to help out against the Terminators, and since we handled ourselves as well as we did, we're quickly recruited to the cause. Of course, the cause being fighting against Skynet, there's a couple of hangups along the way. First is the intriguing revelation that Skynet has just discovered how to use time travel. Now, we, of course, the audience, know that Skynet eventually invents this technology since that's the catalyst for the whole franchise. But we're introduced to the notion here in small chunks, as Skynet uses the time travel tech to look back on short-term losses. After losing a battle against the human resistance, Skynet uses the data gained from the fight as a tactical tactical advantage, teleporting Terminators back in time to key moments during those fights in order to change the loss to a win. This leads to genuinely surprising and harrowing moments during missions where you'll be gallivanting along, only for a squad of Terminators to literally appear out of nowhere in a blue flash to flank you. Quick thinking and big guns are the only thing that are going to keep you alive during these situations, especially since you have no idea when or where Skynet is going to drop reinforcements from the future on your ass. They could be HKs materializing above you, T-800s manifesting in front of you. With the already fraught tension of trying to stay alive, the idea that Skynet could just fucking nemesis some Terminators into the environment at any given time is truly scary. As the story continues, we're also slowly introduced to the latest model of Terminator, the lifelike T-800s. In the movies, they mentioned that Skynet tried to make Terminators look human to fool resistance troopers, but that they all looked too plastic and fake. This is touched upon here, and even mentioned outright, but during the events of Future Shock, we get to see the Resistance meeting the new lifelike models firsthand. Turns out, one member of the Resistance, a guy named Bishop, another Alien reference, nice, was too cowardly to keep up the fight, so he went to Skynet in an attempt to save his own ass. Instead, Skynet gutted him inside out, hooked him up to a machine, and kept him alive to become the genetic template for the new lifelike models, the first batch of which look like him. We, of course, eventually track down our betrayer, and, well, as the story comes to the finish line, the Resistance discovers that Skynet has not only been dropping Terminators back in time at key points to change the course of certain battles, but it has also been sending itself messages backwards in time using a complex quantum relay in order to facilitate additional tactical advantages. It's never outright said in-game, but this is the reason why I think Future Shock opens with Judgment Day in 1995 instead of 1997, because of Skynet's time travel interference. Naturally, the Resistance forms a plan to hijack the relay and send a uniquely coded virus backwards in time to Skynet's inception point, destroy Skynet at the source, and there was never a war in the first place. That's the point of the convoluted final mission, to upload the virus piece by piece to the relay, since the whole thing can't be fired back as one singular package. Now, I know I kind of disparaged the final mission, but as the story has progressed to this point, we've seen multiple characters in the Resistance die in the effort to turn the tide of the war. No one is safe in this story. Absolutely no one. After plugging in 4 out of 5 pieces of the virus, our character contacts Resistance HQ, where a huge battle is taking place to buy our character time to finish the job, only to learn that John Connor has been killed in the attack. This game actually kills John fucking Connor. It actually has the brass balls to go there, and it is a chillingly effective moment, because you truly feel like everything is on the line here. If Connor is dead, if the Resistance is losing, it is all on you to finish the mission and win the war. And honestly, within the atmosphere that the game crafts, it really does not feel likely that you can actually pull it off. Still, if you fight your way through, if you stay the course, and you manage to pathfind your way through the massive base, inserting the final piece of the virus results in an ending cutscene where it looks for a moment like everything really has gone tits up. Our character is literally hanging on for dear life, but then the quantum relay sends the virus back and suddenly the future changes. Now, only you and a handful of others will ever know how close you came to a future ravaged by death and how you won the war before it was ever fought. And that, kids, is Terminator Future Shock. It is kind of unbelievable to me that a game like this, using such a huge IP, from such a huge developer, with such a big name as Todd Howard attached to it, has fallen into obscurity. Granted, this might be the basis for Bethesda's future game building, but it also does serve as kind of the basis for their it's a feature not a bug gameplay that Bethesda is poked and prodded for. Yes, there are numerous bugs and glitches here, but there's also incredible gameplay and atmosphere at work. Sure, the vehicle segments are frustrating to play by today's standards, but their inclusion and even their very functionality was a revelation back in 1995. The X engine alone, with the 3D environments and full mouse look and map system, are a wonder for the time, outdone only by Quake's accomplishment a year later, but even Quake didn't have a map that you could utilize. Playing through Future Shock feels like playing through a lost artifact, a game that both reflects today's modern gameplay advances as well as the ambition and feel of yesterday's classic shooters, a time when the term first-person shooter had yet to be invented, and the idea of open-world gaming was barely a gleam in anyone's eyes. Sure, Elder Scrolls 2 Daggerfall was on the way from Bethesda even even while Future Shock was in development, but Todd Howard points to this game as the starting point for Bethesda's design structure and world building. When you couple this with the excellent storytelling, the incredible atmosphere, something that is heightened by the excellent soundtrack by Andy War, which you are currently listening to in the background right now, and the technological advancement of the game engine, Terminator Future Shock more than makes up for the design flaws and the buggy moments that threaten to derail the experience here and there. This is a game that deserves, no, demands a remaster, or even a remake, but good luck trying to get Bethesda and whoever owns the Terminator IP rights now to shake hands on that one, kids. If anything, the best we're ever going to get out of this is a possible fan patch from dedicated folks who love both Bethesda and Terminator, but I'm not going to hold my breath on that one. All things considered, I had a fantastic time with this one, kids, and I'm going to give Terminator Future Shock a 7.5 out of 10. Well, that was a fun one to work on, but I'm still just not entirely sold on that time travel intro. Maybe it'll just work out better if I scrap it entirely. Oh, no, the intro works just fine. Oh, hey, future me. Hey, bud. You ever figured out what it was that you're supposed to go back in time to fix? I actually thought it was this, but turns out the intro is really good. Hey, listen, in a few minutes here, I'm gonna show up again, and I'm gonna tell you not to run with the time travel intro, but I was wrong about that. It's actually really good, so you should just hit render now before I pop in so that I'll be able to see it for myself. Oh, okay, sure. You really need to work on landing in the right spots when you time travel, you know that? You're telling me. Anyways, see you soon. Oh man, he was right. This came out really well. Ranger! Don't make a time travel intro for the Terminator video. It's cliche and a hack move, and everyone has done one of those. The future is literally hanging in the balance. You hit render already, didn't you? Well, yeah, you told me to. What?